Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm here today with Kale Zelden. Kale Zelden is a veteran classroom teacher focused on great books and big ideas. With over 20 years of experience in the field, Kale is particularly interested in the neglected wisdom of our inheritance. He is passionate in exploring the intersection of ancient patterns and novel problems. In addition to his classroom work, Kale hosts a weekly podcast with Rod Dreher called The General Eclectic. He lives and works at a boarding school in Rhode Island with his wife and three children, two large dogs, and 10 chickens. Kale, you have a lot going on at the house, so I do appreciate you coming on and talking to me today for a little bit. How's it going?
Great. My pleasure. I'm happy to be here. Of course, I think both of you and I are on a break right now, so have a little bit of more carve out time as we get ourselves ready for the festivities at the end of the week. But yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's great. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
of course. Now, part of the 10 chickens is not going to be part of the Christmas feast, though, right?
Correct. Right. We're holding on to their egg laying capabilities for a little while longer here. So,
That's
plus
awesome.
my daughter in particular would kill me if we were to ever suggest such barbarism as she eats her boneless chicken breast on her plate, that she's not making the connection between the two of them. But whatever, we get it. We get it.
That's great. That's great. So, yeah, thank you for coming on today. I really do appreciate it. And I just really want to start off by asking, well, actually, let me reframe that. So,
Yeah.
why why I'm so grateful that you're on the show is because, you know, this podcast, this YouTube platform is to have interesting discussions with people in the fields of psychology, theology, and philosophy. And like many people who I've talked to thus far, you do a good job at really taking those fields and finding a way to blend them in together. And I think it's so pertinent because you are a literature teacher, right? So
Mhm.
through the platform of literature, you are experiencing uh, ancient thought, you are experiencing philosophical notions, you are experiencing psychological problems or psychological thoughts all through the lives of particular characters. So I think that
Mhm.
you're a very interesting voice, and you're going to have a lot of interesting takes uh, in this discussion, right? In this discussion that we're inevitably going to get into, that will touch on these three fields, like I said, psychology, philosophy, and theology. But before we get into the weeds and into all that, I just want to ask, what is the goal? What is the gist
Mhm.
of your particular intellectual project?
Well, I think I'm a generalist by by nature
Yeah,
and by interest, and which made me a bad graduate student because, as you know, the push in graduate school is to sort of specialize, focus, drill
yeah,
down, get your niche, that sort of stuff, and of course you do what you have to do. And but I like a broad array of things. I'm interested, like you said, my primary mode is lit, but I love philosophy and theology and politics and psychology in particular, and anthropology and sociology and all these things, because I think that a lot of those partitions are somewhat unfortunate. And maybe that's the sort of the arrogance of someone who teaches stories for a living, that you think that everything is sort of grist for the mill and you can take and steal and beg and borrow from all the different disciplines. But I do think that, that I'm more interested in, my I titled my Substack The Underneath, and I did that because I am interested in where all of those various disciplines, all of our various disciplines, sort of are fed by an undercurrent or an under world that manifests in a variety of different ways. And so, my hope with my work, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, is to find ways to connect people with these springs,
yeah,
these deeper wells of tradition, but just wisdom,
yeah.
these deeper wells of wisdom. And so that's why that's really what I like to do. It's like it's what sort of changed my life, was when I recognized that there was a whole substrate of reality that I had been kind of somewhat superficially dancing on top of, but not knowing what it was. So when I made that initial connection, it changed the way that I saw. And so looking for ways to connect people to that undercurrent, that underneath space is really what animates me.
And I like the way that you describe this. I want to reframe it just a little bit.
Yep.
I love this. You want to make people aware. You want to make people attentive to something.
Mm-hmm.
And what it seems like you want to do is you want to make people look up, and you want to make people, we have this has been a lost, really like a lost thought, a lost perception of reality, is that that we interact in a cosmos, right? And this cosmos is vertical, it's not horizontal.
Right,
and so
right.
we need to look up to things, right? And certain things allow us to look up to other certain things, and certain things allow us to look up to other things. And it's this ladder, as you put, of wisdom. It's this ladder of wisdom that we're looking up to. And it could start in many different ways. So maybe it starts by, actually one way it started with me, and we didn't discuss this in our private conversation, but one way it did actually start with me was through the work of Ernest Hemingway, right? And so when I'm thinking of this cosmos, and if I'm to put like to really, and what I'll get at is, I think it's a theological cosmos, right? It's we look at the world like that. But if my pen, I guess this is the highest part of the cosmos, this is the lower end, I would say, Hemingway is probably like revolving somewhere around here, right? So you're getting some, theological themes in Hemingway's work. I mean, I'm thinking of The Old Man and the Sea, right? So you have that allegory there. But the fact that I'm looking up to something, the fact that I'm looking up to Hemingway, and I'm reading his work, and it's making me think of possibly connections with Christ. It's making me think of proper ways to live out virtuous masculinity. It allows me to look up again. So now or maybe it allows me to climb up more. And so now I climbed up a little bit, and I'm at a different platform. And maybe that platform is maybe a different, like, secular author. Okay, and that secular author makes me climb up more. And maybe now I'm at Dante, right? And then I look at Dante, and now I'm at this Dantean platform, and I'm like, oh my God, like the cosmos is even higher up, but I feel like I feel closer to that vertical point than I ever have before. And it makes me climb, and it makes me climb, and it makes me climb. And I think for you, and as people watching this, we both can comfortably say that, we are Roman Catholic. And I think whether or not we are going to overtly admit it, teaching Shakespeare, teaching Dante, teaching a great work of art, teaching Hemingway, Faulkner, whatever, I think for people who are inclined to perceive reality like you and I, our goal is always to lead that person up the cosmos, lead that person ultimately to God, right? And with all that being said, I kind of want to direct this a little bit into get this conversation into the realms of specifically Catholicism for a little bit. So I'm curious, because with all that being said, you have, for as many people like you and me whose projects might be Catholic overtly or covertly, right? You have more people who's not necessarily, you have more people that's not their project, right? And so even in, or for a lot of like young Catholics today, I see a lot of Catholics being like disenchanted with Catholicism, but still gripping to some religiosity. And so what I've noticed is that there are many Catholics, young, middle-aged, and old, who are leaving the actual capital C Catholic faith and moving on to other things. That could be maybe non-denominational Protestantism, that could be Eastern Orthodoxy, that could be Trumpism, that could be conspiracy theories. I'm curious, as someone who teaches great works of literature, as someone who maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm talking, I'm assuming too much, but as someone who goal maybe is to help people reach that point, reach them up that vertical ladder. I'm curious why you think we're in this particular situation that we're in today. Why are so many Catholics running away from the faith?
Yeah.
Why are many
Well,
people going down the ladder instead of up?
yeah. So I like your sort of model. There's a sort of a vertical reality and a horizontal reality, and that we sort of as human beings are sort of uniquely situated to be, people will say we're amphibious, right? We're like the angels but not, and we're like the animals of the earth but not, right? We're this sort of this interesting between space, and so therefore we have to both contend with the vertical axis and the horizontal axis.
Yeah.
I think that much of what I encounter with my students, for instance, let's say, is the complete ignorance of the vertical realities, and so much of that ignorance of the vertical reality is in part kind of a flattening and therefore a kind of disenchanting of all things, right? And so all institutions become disenchanted, all families become disenchanted, churches, schools, governments, all of these things become disenchanted, and therefore it becomes a kind of, in my mind, a kind of cynical power game, right? So that sort of jockeying for position or status or whatnot. And but yet we have this intuitive sense that there's something more. Now, I would argue, maybe to nuance it a little bit, that not only must we sort of connect to some sort of vertical reality that goes up, but I would argue that you also have to kind of connect yourself with the underworld in that kind of classical sense of the underworld, where the ancestors are buried type thing.
Yeah.
And so
Shadow
it's
work, to put
yeah, I do. Yeah,
context.
yeah, I think that that's a real thing, and it's why every story that is worth its salt has a hero face either by literally going to an underworld or facing some version of the underworld, even if it's a sort of the psychological depths or what have you. But it's a visit, right? You have to go there, and there's some kind of ritual with which to go there. There's always a temptation to stay there, but the sense of calling, right, for the hero calls them out of that dwelling space into hero space, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
And so you talk about Hemingway, or you talk about what have you, right? All of it is kind of wrestling with that haunt. Now, what strikes me about Hemingway is that the world has the remnants of a vertical reality, but it's been sort of blasted out of feasibility, and so the characters are kind of haunted by that. You think of Jake and Sun Also Rises. He's haunted by his flattened world. He knows that it's not enough. And I don't know if you remember the novel, but there are a couple of instances in which he goes and visits quietly a church on his way to the bullfights in Barcelona, I guess it is. I forget. That thing I get, so I'm going to get that wrong. Sorry, guys. But he just quietly goes into the church, and he's struck by the small little red light, the small little red candle that's lit above the tabernacle, and he kind of just checks in with it. Hemingway doesn't make a big deal out of it, but it's like he goes there, right? And that's a visit in some sense to the underworld. Now, whether the underworld talks back to him is a different story, and maybe that's part of the crisis that we're facing, is that we don't feel like the spirits are talking back to us. I don't know, but that's a slightly different matter. Now, why are people fleeing the institutions? I think they're fleeing the institutions because they're not being fed any kind of vertical reality, and so that everything's become flattened, and everything's essentially an NGO, right? Everything's essentially, do good things and I find that personally uncompelling.
Because what are you, I mean, again, going back to how we started this particular conversation, is what are you looking up to? Even in our very language, we use those, we use those phrases, and we just think that they're just because they're so second nature, we don't think of anything other than I look up to my father. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
My father and I are basically the same height. I look up to I look up to I don't know, maybe I look up to my priest, I look up to my professor. We don't realize that that's how we layer, or we perceive reality so well. Let me put
Well,
it
I think what I'm getting from what you're saying is that you know the physicality of our being,
yeah,
right, points us to some structure. The very structure of reality is structured in such a way so that even when we say something like, think about this, Joe, like I understand. Well, like just think about the word understand. I'm standing under
under
something, right?
yeah.
Like it's unavoidable. Our very language is physical. It like it puts you in certain positions. So when you say that, you know, I look up to my father, you know, there is up also means out and past and
Yes.
beyond and prior, right? And so it is a standpoint which you are trying to occupy a space, right? And I think that,
There's some gravitas behind it.
yeah,
Like I look
yeah,
up to my father. I'm in all in once. I'm looking up to him, maybe I'm looking up to him physically. And maybe you could look up to your father physically. I want to be physically like my father, but it's more than that. I want to be my father's, I want to be like my father's soul. I want to be like my
yeah,
father's
yeah,
virtue.
yeah.
There's this gravitas
Mm.
that surrounds this phrase I look up to. And
Because remember, I just want to jump in.
yeah,
Like when you look up something, like the, you know, and this is in Dante, this is in everything, right? When you look up to something, it's fundamentally a navigational image, right?
yeah,
You look up, you find you're looking for the North Star, right? And so you see up because that is what to what and by what you are orienting yourself, and therefore, you know, what one ought to do can only make sense if you can establish that which you are looking up to. It's a
correct.
star,
Yep.
right? And so it's navigational, right? And so when you say you are looking up to your father, for instance, that's what you're aiming at,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, and the whole hamartia bit and all that sort of stuff, right? I know when in order to hit the mark, I have to know the mark and I have to see the mark and
Yes.
I have to
Yes.
hit the mark, right? And so, but if I don't, then then big problems ensue. Like literally, where am I supposed to aim my arrow, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that if you're sort of using that image, but then, and I think this gets into sort of what your project might be about, which is, you know, I if I don't look up to my father, okay, let's say my father's a dirtbag,
Yeah.
right? And so therefore I don't look up to well, what if I look up to my father and he is a dirtbag? Well, that's a problem, right?
Sure.
What if I look up to my father and I see that there's nobody there? There's no father to look up to. Well, that's a crisis too,
Yeah.
right? And so therefore you either are in search of substitute fathers, and God bless you, we'll hope you find one that's worthy of your attention, right?
Yeah.
But what if you find nothing there, or you find one that will lead you astray? And so you know, you think of, you know, I can't believe I'm going to bring a Pinocchio reference. I'm going to sound really Petersonian here, but
Love it.
you know, the you know, when he leaves his adoptive father, he's in essence just substituting his father for an alternate one, and one who might not have his best interests. And so we see this, right, with boys all the time. They become peer oriented, not star oriented, not
Sure.
father oriented, right? And so
Yeah.
we know what happens.
Horizontal to use
Exactly.
the yep.
Exactly. And the whole idea of looking up to a father is that, you know, in theory, your father's been there. He's done that. He's seen things. He's lived longer.
Yeah.
He's experienced more. And so therefore there's a certain amount of implicit trust in looking up because experience. But what if not, right? And I think that is sort of what we
Yeah.
see here, right? That the fathers are not fathers.
Correct. Correct. And well, I guess just I mean, this is just so damn dangerous because when you live on this, when you are perceiving the way you structure your reality in more of a horizontal ways you just described, the kids with their friends, it's,
Mhm.
you're just looking by.
Exactly.
You're looking at the peripherals,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, you're there, I'm here. And yeah, there's no like hierarchical reality. And yeah, that could be very dangerous because what it could do is to go back to Hemingway, to go back to The Sun Also Rises. I think
Right.
you mentioned Jake and how he has moments in the church. And I remember some of my favorite scenes from the novel you talked about how Jake was at church with the red candle. And
Yeah.
Jake, I remember him in the fields. I forget exactly like what mountain range he was on, but I remember him looking at the landscape, drinking red wine.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think Jake might have perceived that as well, there was like religiosity in that scene.
I think you and I would use the language of sacramentality, right? That there's something, the world is full of God's grandeur. It's charged with God's grandeur,
Yeah.
right? And he knows, like, that's the thing about Jake. It's such a painful story, because Jake has a fundamentally sacramental vision of the world, but he lives in one that has been robbed from him. And of course, and he can't even fully participate in it for
Right.
the various war wound reason. He can't even participate in the sacramental order. And so
Yeah.
he's sort of a perfect condensed symbol, I think, of where we find ourselves in
Yeah.
our
No,
moment right now.
no, I want to bring up so much. I'm gonna like zip my lips. So I even want to bring
Discipline.
up I want to even bring up his impotence, Jake's impotence.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
Yeah.
But I wanted to guess brought it up a little more explicitly in the sense that he literally can't get vertical, and he
Correct.
wants to.
Yeah, that's right.
He wants, and I don't mean to be crude on the show, but I think that's actually part of what Hemingway was trying to do there.
Because I mean, again, to be crude, I'll play the crude card, but in order to be vertical, you become fruitful, right? I mean,
Yes, right.
And he
Yes.
can't, like, the tragedy of he and Lady Brett, is that they both feel it, is that they both know that they're supposed to be creative.
Yes.
Like literally, and of course also analogically and all that, and he can't, and they both know it. And
Yeah.
so what is the tagline of the novel is, isn't it pretty to think so? And it's just this like gutting tragedy, really.
Yeah. And see, what a fascinating way, isn't it, to think that this is such a great door opener for this point that I really want to get into. Is I think that's a lot of what we're experiencing today. Isn't it pretty to think so?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's right. Isn't it pretty to think so? Isn't it pretty to think so? We're just living in this this horizontal reality, and this is nice, or I'll do this because, and again, you can say maybe you'll do it. I'm gonna act nice because the state is telling me to act nice. I guess I'm going to aspire to these virtues that may actually be on the rung of verticality, right? But then it just stops there. Then it's like severed from everything else. And I guess we'll stop thinking there, and then then our highest value will be, possibly this good virtue, but it's not the best. Or to be grammatically incorrect, but just to make it a little more powerful, it's not the goodest, right?
That's right. That's right.
So
yeah. No, and it's exactly right. And we know that things that are good, if placed in the position of the summum bonum, right, the highest good, the greatest good, are bad, right? And there's another great line in the novel, and it's a fascinating moment. Of course, Jake is a great lover of the bullfight, and he knows it. Like he gets it, right?
Yeah.
He gets it. And in fact, the old guys, the old Spanish guys who've been doing this since they were little kids, like, see in Jake, like, he has a afición, like he can see, right? And what's fascinating is that Brett can see too. And there's this great line, and and it's Brett. Jake is teaching Brett how to see it, and she can see it, and there's one of the bullfighters. He's really good at faking it, right? He can make it look like he's getting really close to the bull, right? And there's one of my favorite lines of all time, and he says, and she could see afterwards all that was faked turned bad and gave unpleasant feeling, and it's just like this perfect line, right? So think about, like, scale that out, like just abstract that out of the story just for a second. In life, afterwards, all that was faked turned bad and gave unpleasant feeling. And like, doesn't that capture something just really true? Fake living, inauthentic living, like all of those things. I mean, that to me is is like a bomb.
And so why are so many, I know people who are just not Catholic watch this show, so let me just reframe it.
Yeah.
Why are so many Christians, why are so many high schoolers who are going off to college, why are so many people who were people of the book, as I like to
Yep.
put it at one time,
Yep.
yeah, why are they rejecting the vertical for the horizontal? And we will get to Catholicism in just a little bit, but I would love to hear your thoughts specifically on that. I am curious why Catholics are jumping to Eastern Orthodoxy or jumping to Protestantism. Why? Let's get back to this. Let's go back to Jake in the field looking at the mountains, drinking the red wine. Why is it that people of the book are rejecting the greatest good, and they're trying to live out that religiosity in, well, you're a man of politics. Why are they trying to live that out in Trumpism? Why are they trying to live that out in conspiracies? Why are they trying to live that out in this like hermeneutics of suspicion? What's going on with that?
Yeah. I think you can go at this, I think, a couple of different ways. I think in one sense, it's not being bought, right? Because the people who are selling it don't believe it. And so they feel like they're being sold, right? You know, you and I had an offline conversation, and I joked, I said, look, you know, I could never do sales because I just have this sort of hyper self-consciousness. Like I can't sell. But if it's something I believe in, I can go off and be really compelling and all those sorts of things. And so I think that a lot of, and look, you taught high school students, you know this very, very well.
Sure.
You coach high school students just like me. You know that as soon as they sniff out inauthenticity, they are done. They're not going to give you a second of their time if they think you are a phony, you know, to use the old Holden Caulfield line. You know, it's like they can smell phony a mile away. And my sense is that those people who are in charge of the church, if that's what we're talking about, that most kids just don't believe it. The adults don't look like they believe it. They certainly don't live like they believe it. You know, the adults in charge, they don't really look like they believe it too much. And so I think that so much of it is a turnoff. And then add that on top of, like, not only do they not seem to believe it, but then they're engaged in all manner of corruption, either sexual or economic. People are like, screw those dudes. They you know, they don't even believe it, right? I mean, I think that's devastating.
And so maybe they attach themselves, maybe they, again, maybe in good faith, they're trying to find more things to bring them up the vertical ladder. But
Right. So like if you look at substitutes, I think
yeah, let's talk about the substitutes.
yeah, I think they tack to like Trumpism or QAnonism or even like LGBTQ plusism and all of that. I think they gravitate toward those because everybody needs an operating system, right? And so you're looking for your OS. And so if this faith that you've been sort of brought up in, number one, it's not cool, right? We know that it's not cool. It's what you've been given has been pretty superficial and pretty rootless. And you know, you're like, well, that's dumb. All right, so I'm not doing that. I know that much, you know. And so then you look, well, what do other people do? Well, other people seem to get into this thing, and other people seem to get into that thing, and so I think you just cast about looking for something that kind of works, right? And if you look at the spread of Christianity, for instance, you know, going back into the ancient world and how it spread into Europe and all that, and how it spread in really all over the world, it spread because it worked. And I get the very real sense that kids, you know, look at the church, say in a random American suburb, and I think they just sort of look at it and say, well, it doesn't really work.
Well, and it's funny because I'm writing down a note right now that it's funny because whether they're kids or whether they're young adults, whether they're middle age, I think people need to lean in more and
how so?
more about why are they about their suspicion. So their people are suspicious, right? And that that suspicion might be the first thing that ultimately leads them away from practicing faith anymore, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
walking away and proclaiming that they are atheists. And suspicion means that something's not. Suspicion is, I guess it's going to mean that I'm realizing, I'm perceiving that something isn't correct, right?
Right.
So in order for that to be true, that means that something is correct, right?
Yeah.
So
This is the point that the poet George Herbert makes. That even in my doubt, it leads me to exactly what you're saying. It leads me to truth, which is ultimately where I'm going to find you, right? So there's this, we're sort of stuck in this because even our skepticism posits the truth.
And you see that skepticism being posited in the truth. Well, I guess in many different ways, and this is why why Dante's project is so important, is because well, he very visibly and very vividly says how that suspicion in seeking of truth can be dangerous, right? So suspicion, so my suspicion, it says that this is not correct, but something must be correct, right? So there actually is a vertical reality, but again, the miscalculation of that is I'm still on the vertical, I'm still on the horizontal playing field. So, lust, greed, wrath, these are all pride, envy. These are all ways in which my suspicion that may be good faith suspicion might lead me, although I'm trying to go up, it's actually leading me down, or it's actually just leading me more on the peripheries of this horizontal playing field, or this horizontal field of reality. And yeah, that's not good. And so I think I tend not to get too frustrated with individuals who become more overzealous with things other than I guess like religions of the book, because I don't think many people are in bad faith. I don't even think I might even be so far to say I don't even think I think that many atheists of today are not in bad faith. They're suspicious because they want to scale up the vertical reality, but again, they get bogged down, they get miscalculated, and then eventually this is a downfall. This could be their downfall, and this is not good. And we have this world now. I don't want to be too general, but we live in most societies, in most Western societies, we live where individuals are operated, I guess, in the mode of being that I just described. And yeah, I mean, and we're seeing a lot of difficult things here with that. And I think that's even why we're seeing uptick in more metaphysical interests. When I say metaphysical interests,
what do you mean?
Like new agey type of things.
Yeah. Well, I think so, and I get the real sense that the so much like the church, for instance, gets bogged. It's old, right? And so it's had lots of time to make lots of mistakes, sort of on the practical level, and so therefore it's very easy, especially in our sort of post-enlightenment tech infused world. You don't need to believe in God in order to like work your iPhone, right? The iPhone's great, right? It's awesome, and it's a product of science, and so therefore you can sort of create a false floor under which you don't have to bother, right? I mean, imagine, you don't have to drill down, because look at all the stuff that we can do, right? And so so I think for me, and this I remember this as a kid, kind of running the mental calculus myself, and I said, and like, oh, like who needs to bother with this old stuff, right? The old stuff is sort of old. And look, I know how to, I can program my dad's VCR and he can't program the VCR,
Right.
and so there was this recency bias that I kind of drank from pretty heavily. So and look, it's easy. Like if all of a sudden you say, look, Joe, you don't have to bother with anything after, before 1973. Well, that's great. I mean, I'd much rather do a 50-year project than, a 3,000-year project, a 4,000, a 5,000-year project. Just cut it off in 1970 and call it a day, and we're done. So there's a practicality to that kind of mental
No, no, of
script
course.
that I think is underrated. And therefore you get all the good music and you get all the good technology, and you don't have to worry about all the old bad stuff. And so and then you sort of see there's a way. I'm not saying this is the correct way to see it, but you can see that a lot of people in the church have played a similar kind of game, not in any kind of conspiratorial way, but new springtime and all that kind of stuff. And I think there's a way for me. I needed to be grounded in something that was older than 1970. I really did need it, and I
Yeah.
didn't know that I needed that. And so I'm struck, to if you referenced Dante a couple of times here, and I think his poem speaks to something profoundly true about the order of nature. And that is when he runs. So if you remember the opening image, he is in the woods and he's lost and he's scared, right? And he sees up top of the mountain, and he sees the light up there, and he says, I want to go there. And so he tries to go. But as soon as he tries to go up the mountain, he's stopped by the leopard, the lion, and the she-wolf, right? And he's frustrated. These are scary creatures, and and so almost certainly allegorical, but whatever. I think you just said from a reading standpoint, Dante wants to go up and he can't go up because there are scary monsters that are
Yeah,
keeping him
right.
from
Yeah,
doing it.
there's a scary
And
monster.
then he turns around and he sees this shadow, and it turns out it's Virgil, and Virgil kind of operates both as his sort of idol, his poetic idol, but also as his mentor. And he says, look, I want to bring you up to the mountains, see the great good that is up there, but in order for me to show you the great good, we have to go down first.
Yeah.
And that is when he invites Dante to follow him into hell, into the inferno, into the underworld. And of course, this is sort of some interesting poetic combination of ancient visions of the underworld with the overlay of hell and all that. But it works, right? And so there's something about going deep into something in order to properly ascend up something that is fundamental to it. And I walked into a church, born in 1973, and I was sort of born into a world which there was no, I don't mean there was no hell, although I'm sure some of my
No, yeah, no.
religion teachers would have maybe said something like that, but rather there was no notion of having to kind of go down and then up. Like it was all just, everything's great. And of course for me, like that was fine when you're 6, 7, 8 years old, but
Yeah,
by the time 15 rolls around, I'm like, that's just not real. It's just not
right,
true.
right.
And so I know
Oh my
you had
God.
a
And
similar
then,
experience, right?
yeah, well, and then I just going off what you said, and then, yeah, we do know, oh my God, we do know service to keeping people energized in Catholicism or energized in the faith at all, because on top of that, most people are just going to get a grade school, high school level of theology being taught to them.
Right, right,
So
right,
on
right.
top of that, you maybe okay. So like yeah, I mean I get and what to just put it in more blunt language, what you're talking about is really like a post council church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so in the post council church, yeah, you don't get a lot of well now you're starting to, but yeah, like this notion of hell doesn't necessarily even exist. So
Yeah,
there's
but
no
and just being plugged into sort of older realities, right? And so if you
yes,
asked me earlier, and I don't want to turn this into some harangue about the Second Vatican Council.
no, no,
I think
no,
I have a somewhat nuanced position on that, but
sure,
I think what an accident of the council is you have this flattening that we were talking about,
yes, yeah.
right?
Well, and what does flat do? makes everything horizontal.
All
It's like,
horizontal. It's
you
all
know,
horizontal, and it's other. It's sort of, you're right. It's a total horizontal experience. And so, if you ask me, for instance, why so many people seem to be intrigued and even enough to even go over to something like Eastern Orthodoxy, is that there's the sense that in Eastern Orthodoxy there's a healthier appreciation for vertical realities, that the mystery of the liturgy, etc., untainted by the stupid, frankly, and petty political squabbles that we seem to engage in on the regular in the modern church. And so I'm not, I don't know what I think about that ultimately, but I certainly don't blame them,
mhm.
because I know what their heart is yearning for, something that kind of captures this axis that you and I are talking about.
Yeah,
And and there's a sense that the lived reality, right? The lived reality of parish life does not speak to them as human beings.
no, and I think, well, and that's always been my thought with why we're seeing this shift. And before I talk about this shift, just to bridge the point that I wanted to make before
Yeah, go ahead.
was, you get, we do no service because you get a lot of people who, at the same, we're doing two things. You were not expressing the vertical reality of life, um, and at that same time, we're we're explaining these very deep truths, these deep theological concepts, um, in too physical of terms, right?
Okay.
So it's like
Okay.
this like third party hell is like, I mean, I walked out of eighth grade. Hell is a physical place.
Right.
Heaven is a
Right.
physical place. And when you realize, when you become suspicious of that, and when you realize that no, this isn't a, what the hell are they talking about? What the hell is
Mhm.
the hell is this person talking about? Hell is not a hell is not a physical place in the sense, like, or in the same way that, like, as I'm sitting here today in Cleveland Heights, right? It's the same physical, that's physical, this is
Yeah.
physical, and they're the same type of physicality. And so when you realize that that's not true, yeah, you just go, oh, well, then all this is a lie. And the vertical
Right.
structure
Right.
of reality is a lie. And this is all dumb, this is all stupid. And so
Do
then
you?
you continue to look for, so what do you look for then? Well, inside of you, there still might be this yearning to look up,
Mhm.
but but then again, like, so then you just look to the side, and then you look to the side, and then in good faith, you attach yourself to some type of ism,
Right.
whether
Right.
that's
Totally.
whether that's going to be a socialism, whether that's going to be a politicalism, whether that's
Right.
going to be occultism. Because the interesting thing about occultism is that, um, I am somewhat interested in it because I understand why it's alluring. Because it expresses, because of the physicality of occultism, because it's playing around with crystals, because it's a
Yeah.
playing around with, well, I guess, like, more physical stuff.
Yeah.
It's easier to, you think, oh, okay, well, then maybe there is a, metaphysical reality, and that metaphysical reality is being activated by
Right.
physical
Right.
things, so it's more approachable. But getting back to what,
Well. Just to jump in real quick.
sure,
It feels
does that
more
make
real.
sense? Yeah, it
Yes,
feels
it
more real.
feels more real, right? I mean, and we forget that. I mean, look, especially, think of it, to the two of us, right? I mean, very comfortable and energized by ideas and images and super realities, etc. But not everybody is, right?
Yeah,
And I think what the attraction to something like Eastern Orthodoxy is, again, to use that as an
please, yeah,
example,
I want to go
is
in
that
there.
it's physically demanding.
Yep.
Okay, the liturgies are long, the fasting requirements are real, they're robust, I might even say manly.
Hmm.
Um, and that speaks to certain people, because the bar is not low, right? That it costs something. And I think we all intuitively know that those things in life that are ultimately meaningful
Yeah.
and edifying cost something. And I
Yeah.
don't mean a price tag, right? I don't get it for free. Like I have to do so I think
It
it's
takes
a
you out of mediocrity.
right. That's right. That's right.
Nietzsche says this, and I don't know exactly, forget where. I think it's Zarathustra. He says that think of, I'll butcher the explanation a little bit, but I'll get the gist.
Yeah.
Think about the person you look up to. Okay, so again, actually,
There it is. Yeah.
think of the person you look up to, and think about why you look up to them. Usually, the reason why you look up to that individual is because they have gone through some type of deep pain, whether physical or emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And they really, I mean, essentially, I think to bridge a bunch of things, they've gone through the hero's journey. And
Yeah.
so they've done it and they've gotten out alive. And because they have gotten out alive, they're now able to go back to their community and overtly or covertly express this greater sense of, or this greater truth to the people of their tribe, to the people of their community, to the people of their family.
Yeah.
With that being said, you therefore, that means that this, you should not shy away from pain, you should not shy away from suffering, and you should not shy away from negative emotions, because if the thing that if the thing that aspires, if the attribute of the individual that you aspire to be has been activated through pain and suffering and challenge to bring them out of the rung of mediocrity, that means that you then need to go through pain and suffering and challenge in order to perceive this greater notion of truth.
And to become who you are supposed to be, right? We know that, look, the hero, most heroes will do anything rather than go to the dragon's lair, right? It's the last place you want to go because you know what you are going to face, right? You are likely going to get, pummeled. Sorry, that was my notifications. You're going to get pummeled, right? And so, you're going to get killed. You're going to get scorched, right? So it's always the last place you want to go, because we would always rather, sit on the couch, eat some Cheetos and watch the Browns game, right?
Amen.
Right. But we know that in order to be sort of fully who we are supposed to be, we have to go do that. We have to prepare ourselves to do it properly, but we have to go there. And this is nothing, you and I have created. This is the way the universe works, right? That you have to prepare yourself and you have to go into the dragon's lair and you have to slay the dragon, because the dragon holds what you need in order to bring back to your people and to rejuvenate the land, right? This is the way that it works. And if the thing that I'm supposed to believe is the most important thing, if my faith is not preparing me for that, then what is it?
Sure.
It's a waste of my time.
It's a waste. I'm bored. What's the point, as you said?
Right. And so, we talked offline about, like the things that I'm trying to do in my classroom, for instance, like I don't want to bore you and I don't want to waste your time. Right. And because you and I have both lived through experiences in which I've been bored and it's been a waste of my time.
Yeah.
And there's no faster way to cut somebody off, right?
Yeah.
Than to sort of the two-pronged death of irrelevancy and needless, frustration.
So, and I know from going to an Eastern Orthodox divine liturgy before.
Yeah.
There's been a time. So I would say the people who I'm closest with, that is like my close circle of maybe 4 or 5 friends, and then my wife, and then my older brother. I've expressed to them. I've flirted with Eastern Orthodoxy myself.
Yeah.
Because it's exactly it almost like scratches the itch of exactly everything that we just got done explaining. And because it is alluring and it is mysterious, and you actually feel, I think, sometimes when you step into a divine liturgy, you look up and you sense this vertical reality. Ultimately, though, I'm Catholic and I will continue to be Roman Catholic for many reasons. both spiritually and practically, right?
Yeah,
For me, it's
yeah,
like there's a practical reason where my wife and I once had a conversation. I go, "What would you think about
right,
doing
right,
this?"
right.
And she said, "No."
Yeah, yeah, right.
She just said no.
Yeah,
And there's a very practical reason. I don't want to go off and express my faith in a way that my son and my wife will not be, right? So
right.
there's a
Yep,
practical means,
yep,
but also I'm like deeply Italian, and so
yep,
my
yep.
my mother would probably fall over, my nanny would roll over in her grave.
Totally, 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 totally.
But but again, I understand it. Now, what I don't understand is this, and this is actually, and I have no answer. I don't even know if I'm going to comment on this because I literally don't have an answer.
Yeah.
Why are Catholics then? Why do we see some Catholics run away to non-denominational Protestantism?
Mhm. I think you could probably make an argument for temperament types, right? And why they would gravitate, why would they flee the Ark of Peter, the way that the Catholics would understand it, and go to a non-denom church, is one question, right? Or a Protestant church or whatever. And look, and obviously Protestantism is a complicated and diverse
Right.
reality, right? And I have no interest to scorch anybody in any way, shape, or form, of course, right?
Same.
We're all the inheritors of our tradition, and it's always a mess. But I think that the people that I know that have moved to evangelicalism, less so now. I see a little bit less of that now than I did maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, was because the non-denoms had a compelling experience, right? And I'm, of course, we're talking in the American idiom right now. It was a compelling experience that hit all the American notes, right?
Yep.
It's entertaining, it's warm, it's welcoming,
Yeah.
it is decidedly not fussy. It They do small group work. They take scripture seriously. They seem to really believe what they're saying. So all of those things are real. Right? Those are compelling things. And so therefore, it begs the question: then, if they went there because and they were once Catholic, let's say,
Yeah.
or attended a Catholic church, then for whatever reason, they did not find those needed things in their local parish.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's very complicated, right?
No, I
Now
think
you
that's
and I,
certainly.
perhaps again with a sense of the philosophical and theological tradition and the sense of his history, might sort of have a different take on it. But let's be honest, Joe, when you and I show up to the sort of the local, typical, suburban parish, like I'm doing a lot of work mentally and emotionally to keep myself there. Okay, I am.
No, I
And
know.
again,
I do the
and I
same thing.
try and here's the thing: I try real hard not to be. Can I curse? I
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can bleep it out for it.
No,
I
no,
try
I won't.
real hard not to be that asshole.
Yeah.
Okay, like liturgy wars. It's like, oh, really? Like, I don't want to be that guy. I really have no. I don't want to be that. I'm not terribly fussy about rubrics. But you're making me be fussy about the rubrics because you are up there and you're like nothing matters to you.
Yeah.
Like you're on your way out, whatever.
No, no, no.
So
Yes.
I think that's why so that's why they would go then to a non-denom church or what have you, because they want something that feels more real. Now, if you are of another kind of temperament, another kind of bent, let's say that you're like us, kind of nerdy and read our books and whatnot. Eastern Orthodoxy hits another thing that we feel is neglected, which is a seriousness of purpose, of the liturgies we are being called to witness and enact.
Correct.
Right. In my role as a layman, not a priest of the altar, I'm still like there's a seriousness with which I need to prepare myself for this event, and I need to plug myself, and I
Yeah.
need to participate in a way that we know is way more profound than just clapping or holding our hands up, right? And so it speaks
Yeah.
to it because it doesn't seem like they give a rat's behind about, a teen mass or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
so you can see how it speaks to those kind of temperaments. Now, or let's say that you are attracted to good preaching. Let's say that your sense of things is, so you're going to go to, maybe a local Lutheran church that, man, that preaching is serious. Like they
Yeah.
take it, it's studied. It's sort of like the Dominicans
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Protestant world. Boy, that could really speak to part of me,
Yeah.
right? Because wow, this guy is making all the right references. He's making all the right connections. He's treating me like I have more than two brain cells to rub together. Like, hey, here we are.
Yeah.
And so with the respective alternatives, you can see how it speaks to different parts of different people, different perspective, different elements. And so I'm would hope for something a little bit more integrated and connected to the Sea of Peter. I mean, that's what I hope for.
And that's what I hope for too. And there's just something missing, and I know what that something missing is, and I'll try to explain, because I was just having this thought actually yesterday while I was driving. My wife and I we were taking my son to the mall to get a picture of Santa.
Yes, love it,
It's
love
like
it. Talk about a liturgy, my friends. Talk about a liturgy. Yes.
And so I was just trying to distract myself from all the
Yeah.
insanity that was going on at this mall. So, and I had this thought because I was thinking about this conversation, and here's the thought. There's just something this is not going to be profound. Sacramental, though, that there's a sacramental reality that's being missed, specifically in Protestantism. And again, I have Protestant friends and people who are going to be Protestant or who are Protestant or are watching this, and I would just be really curious, maybe comment on this take.
Yeah.
So there's something, okay, so as believers, right? And this is why I'm confused why people jump ship from Catholicism to Protestantism. As believers, if we believe that Jesus is able to perform miracles, right? So I would say every Christian here is going to shake their head and say, yes, Christ is able to perform a miracle. Okay.
Yeah.
And if we believe in that Christ is able, and that the Holy Spirit, right, is able to be understood and perceived in our physical reality, well then why would we leave something that allows us to take in Christ possibly every single day if we're daily mass goers? So if we believe that miracles are real, then we believe in the metaphysical reality of Christ, and that Christ also can insert God's self in our physical reality. Well then,
incarnation. Yeah.
Exactly. Well then, why couldn't and why shouldn't we? Why could we go? Why would I go away from the possibility of, like I said, receiving Christ every day? If my goal as a Christian is to be, as close to Christ as possible, and if the Eucharist allows me to be, well, literally metabolize in both a physical and metaphysical sense of the word, why would I run away from that? Like, why would I run away from that blessed sacrament?
Right.
If that makes sense. You need me to explain
It
that?
does. No,
Okay.
it makes total sense to me. No, I get it, and I think in other words, to be a real tabernacle, a real temple of the Holy Spirit. In other words, because you have found that ultimate claim comes at the end of a string of implications that you no longer can bring yourself to believe, because something or somebody, typically, right, it's almost always a person, right, some person has made it impossible for you in this moment to believe that ultimate claim, right? That what is it, John 6, the Eucharistic teaching in which a third of his followers leave at that point for whatever reason, that was just a bridge too far. And Jesus doesn't correct them. He doesn't say, no, what I meant
Yeah,
was no. He's like, well, then, stinks being you. I mean, that's unfair. I'm not,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure, I'm sure Jesus didn't say that exactly, but because for whatever reason, you have a hang up that is ultimately more compelling than that. Now, I would argue, but it's even that, like, I mean, if you're in the business of arguing at this point, this is why apologetics only can kind of do so much. If you're arguing about it, you've already lost, right? If because something got broken in the chain. And in my experience, what that typically means is that you got treated like crap by somebody that mattered.
Yeah.
You confronted indifferentism, and therefore, you're whatever, for whatever reason, more comfortable thinking of the idea of Christianity rather than the reality of consuming Jesus Christ's soul and divinity through the Eucharist, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to.
No, I know. And I thought, like, I mean, how, 'cause I mean, I want to say this very carefully. It's just, I
Mhm.
wonder, and I want to talk to more Protestants because I want to know that perspective. Because for me, it's just like, well, that makes sense that if God could do literally, I mean, if I'm going to call myself a Christian and believe that, yes,
Mhm.
God possesses this, well, God being reality itself can
Mhm.
perform, miracles can exist in that,
Yep. Yep.
in this way. Well, then why wouldn't I believe in the sacramental reality that, yes,
Mhm.
through this piece of bread, that piece of bread has the ability to become Christ. This wine
Right.
has the ability to become Christ. Why wouldn't I believe that? It's almost like,
Right.
are you selling yourself short a little bit? And
Mhm.
are you properly thinking about the reality of God then?
Well, I
Or
mean, yeah.
go on.
So, but historically, we know that Luther didn't get rid of the Eucharist.
Correct.
I mean, that there's, if you look at some of these sort of early reformations, there was not this sort of abandonment of what you and I would call sort of sacramental realities. So maybe the question then to ask a knowledgeable Lutheran is, how did it become eroded in such a way, if even Luther himself, would have been maybe outraged at the thought of downplaying the reality of the Eucharist. I don't know. I can't imagine it without it, right? I can't imagine my faith without that being very important. The source and summit, as we might say, in our faith tradition. So it's a little bit of a baffling thing, especially since John seems pretty darn clear in his gospel narrative about the Eucharistic teaching.
So I want to, and again, we're not going to steer away from the topic that we just discussed because I feel like everything that we're discussing is there's a through line in it.
Yeah, yeah.
But I want to talk about what we discussed in the very beginning. I think we've defined maybe a meaning crisis is as this disenchanted perception of reality. And to use the lexicon, the verbiage that we were using in the beginning, when part of the meaning crisis is not realizing that reality is vertical, but that it's horizontal.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I know you've done a lot of work and you've written a lot about the meaning crisis in, well, society today and how its roots can be looked back to from hundreds of years ago. So I'm curious how you would describe, I mean, I guess to people who are just coming into this conversation, what is the meaning crisis?
Mhm.
And I'm curious your thoughts on how could Catholicism specifically be a possible remedy to this crisis of meaning?
Mhm. Well, I think the meaning crisis is, we can talk about the capital M, capital C, capital T, the meaning crisis, as a sort of a particular moment in time in which we inhabit. And I think that's true. And we can see it all around us. You and I taught kids, so we can see it, its earliest manifestations in early high school, and probably even middle school. And we can look around at friends and neighbors and family members and uncles and aunts and cousins and all of that. We can see very clearly that the scripts that we have relied upon for a long time are no longer working.
Yeah.
So I think that that's pretty clear. That many people in different idioms can recognize that something's wrong. Okay. Now, I try my best to take the long view, and that there seems to be something specific and unique to humans, that we experience life through a meaning crisis.
Mm,
And so I would say, for instance, that in the opening book of the Iliad, uh, when Achilles is affronted by Agamemnon and his war prize has been taken from him unceremoniously and unfairly and unjustly, according to the dictates of the world in which they inhabit, that is a meaning crisis. And what are you going to do when you recognize that something is wrong? Right? There's an injustice, a cosmic, as it would be in Homeric terms, a cosmic injustice. What do you do? Right? And so stories, I think, are the chronicles of the meaning crisis. Every story is not a story until it has conflict. And so therefore conflict is a kind of meaning crisis. You and I are both big fans of sports, right? And both doing them and watching them. And every time you line up at the start of the opening whistle, it's a meaning crisis. What is going to be revealed?
yeah.
Will I be a winner, or will I be a loser? Or if I play soccer, will we tie? And like, how do
Mm,
I process that? How do I deal with that? I think that this is rich territory, right? But so the meaning crisis is that we die. That's the meaning crisis. And my dogs, I love them, Rosie and Ginny. They do not experience a meaning crisis in the way that you and I experience a meaning crisis.
yeah.
They want their food, and they want to go outside to use the bathroom, and they certainly want to run with me every morning. Like, that's important to them. And they look depressed, and they can sort of go through those
Yeah.
motions. But we have memory in a way that they don't. And we have a future in a way that they don't. And I think that because we're burdened by a future, we recognize that what I do now really matters. Right. What's the great line in The Gladiator? Russell Crowe, Maximus says something like, "What we do here echoes throughout eternity." And like, we know that that's true.
Yeah.
Right. As soon as you hear that line, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're, an atheist or a believer. I don't care if you're, from the East or from the West. I don't, when you hear that line, you're like, that's right.
Yeah.
It matters.
And
We
true.
know it matters.
Yeah.
And so the meaning crisis is, what are you going to do with it then? What are you going to do with these facts? That we know that if we do nothing, we fail.
Wow. That's a great.
And right.
Go on.
And so therefore I have to do something. Or then what the hell am I supposed to do? Well, look around.
Yeah.
What are other people doing? Well, that's a good start. And what have other people done to explain the meaning crisis? Well, that's a good start. And then you have to like do this weird thing where you have to like check it against yourself. Like, well, does that make sense for me?
Sure.
And it just, it sort of expands everything out, and it blows everything up. And you're like, okay, man, I got some things I have to do here. And what if you only live in this flattened world in which your referent is maybe a sibling if you're lucky, maybe a kid in your class if you're lucky, but you're not given a script, you're not given a model, you're not given an image, you're not giving a star, you're not giving anything, right? Anything meaningful. And so then, so I think it's all kind of caught up in that way. So to me, and again, not to sound trite, but that we have so much that's available to us, and and as a Catholic, we have the ultimate thing which is available to us, which is the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the ultimate expression of reality. And why we would be tempted to abandon that, either through active, counter work or passive neglect, is beyond me. Like,
Sure.
what are you scared of? Like, why would we hide that?
Yeah. And to bridge that back, I mean, is someone who's following this conversation linearly, right? I mean, we answered that question though
Mm-hmm.
in the last 45 minutes, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Why would people abandon that? Well,
Mm-hmm.
our conversation that we just had is the answer to that. And why would we abandon that is because, well, lots of reasons. We live in a flattened reality. It's because we're bored. It's because because nothing is allowing us to be able to act out this vertical urge that we have. I mean, these are all reasons why that exists. And I really like the way that you differentiate, but I know that they come together, but I like the way that you differentiate, capital T, capital M, capital C, the meaning crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And you differentiate that from really just like a more day-to-day on the ground meaning crisis, right?
Right.
And I think the way of explaining that through I really just thought about an offensive and defensive line, to go back to the football reference.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
is that, yeah, I mean, there's a meaning crisis when you're a lineman, and yeah, you're looking up, and you're in that 3-point stance, and
Yeah.
you see that nose tackle, and yeah, you're just like, okay, what's the result? What's going to happen?
Right.
Is my quarterback going to get sacked? And then that defensive guy is, am I going to sack that quarterback? Right. And so
it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
There's a real beauty to that, right? And we play games, I think, ultimately, because they prepare us, for life. I mean, again, I don't want to sound trite here, but I really mean it. We practice these things because we learn from our mistakes, we learn from our triumphs. I mean, these are all things, and you ultimately have to make that a reference back to your. It's an analogy for being, and I don't know why we cut ourselves off from that. But I would say this. Yeah, I would say this. I wanted to add this bit. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And I think that such an important element that needs to be inserted into this little corner, to use that reference, in the meaning crisis conversation, is evil's real. And
go on about that. It's funny because
we
I've been thinking a lot about evil lately, so I really want to hear
yeah.
this.
So evil's real, right? And we, as practicing, believing Catholics, understand this, but there seems to be a little bit of an embarrassment about this, and it's something that I lament, not because I think we need to sort of constantly fixate on dark spirits, and whatnot, but I think we need to remember that scripture tells us very clearly, we are in a war that is way bigger than ourselves, right? And we are part of a much larger battle. And what I love about folk Christianity is that they get this intuitively. Like, they know this. It's eggheads like me that want to sort of explain away the realities of evil because it makes me feel uncomfortable. But the tradition is very clear on this. Devils are real things, and they want us, to put it bluntly. They want us. So like, you read something like the Screw Tape Letters, and it's like, it's real, man. So if the meaning crisis, the meaning crisis conversation seems to be perennially handicapped by the unwillingness of conversants to acknowledge evil.
And it's operating right now on a cognitive science level. It's operating on this continental philosophical level. And you do have people like, I love Jonathan Pageau. You do have people who are, and others, and Paul is trying to do this as well. You do have others explaining the meaning crisis, right, using a religiously enchanted language.
Yeah.
And Kale, I mean, it's funny, man. I'm getting pumped up right now because the links that you and I are having, it unfathomable. So and why I'm saying this is because I've been dealing with this exact same struggle, and I am
Well, dude,
happy.
spirits are real, right? You know, one of the things I always love about Paul is like spirits are real, right?
Yes,
And there's a spirit, you know, as Paget would say, there's a spirit to this conversation, right?
yes,
And so, and even though that you and I are not in the same room and we're doing it through these cameras and tech and blah 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 and internet magic, because it's magic, right? It's like there's a spirit to this, and you know, the resonance that we feel is because we're tapping into that spirit.
yeah. And what Vervaeke would call that, what? Like there's a dialogos going on,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Which I'm totally down for. I totally
Yeah.
get that, but I prefer Pajot just said, yeah, there's a spirit to this conversation.
And here's the deal. I don't know when it's coming in the new year, because he just emailed me back and said, "Hey, yep, but let's talk after the holidays." And this is
Okay.
exactly the conversation that I'm trying to bridge these two things. I'm trying to bridge the meaning crisis with
Mhm.
this well, I guess this like this very concrete spiritual reality that exists. I'm having Father Vincent Lampart, who is a
Okay.
very well-known exorcist in the United States,
Yep.
Diocese of Indianapolis. He's gone on Barron's show. He's gone on. He's been on Pints with Aquinas. He
Yep.
just
Yep.
sent me an email back yesterday, and I was so excited that
Mm.
he has agreed to come on and have a conversation, because, as again, I think I'm very comfortable with saying him and maybe one or two other priests are probably the most well-known exorcists in the United States, because Father Vince seems to be upfront and frank in having discussions about it. And I'm just very, it's a hard reconciliation to make, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, how does this make sense? Like, how am I able, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to tailor this conversation with him yet, but and because I don't know, I actually had I don't know, I don't necessarily even know what questions to ask, and I'm very nervous about this interview because I have to do a lot of reading, a lot of homework. It's just,
Yeah.
yes, there
Yeah.
is this meaning crisis, and there is this, to use an internet phrase, we have been black-pilled, we are nihilists.
Right.
That might be, God has been blown up into millions of pieces, and yeah, we're trying to like remember God,
Yeah.
and
Literally remember to put God back together. You know.
yes, exactly, to put God back together. But
Mhm.
I would say that there's a dark blanket that we're all under
Yeah.
in many
Yeah.
different ways, and even people of faith are somewhat are under it. And you very boldly and confidently made that claim that yes, evil spirits are real, and is I think as serious believers, you do have to believe that evil spirits are real. And with that being said, if that's true, I know that then those evil entities, it's hard to talk about because I don't want to sound like too like tinfoil hatted,
It's
but
okay.
these evil realities are a player in this, right?
Yes. Right. You know, look.
Are they like these evil,
Yeah.
like it's like I okay, like real quick, and then I'll let you talk. It's
Mhm.
like in the last part of the last conversation that I had with Zavi Slavin from Seekers of Unity, I discussed how we have amnesia, right? And the mystical project is to awaken what has already been learned. And again, that's another thing that's funny. It's like we in here in the modern West believe that knowledge is something that we as soul actors not find but discover, like
Generate.
we create it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, no, let's go to an ancient, we need to go back to that ancient form of knowledge. It's already out there, right?
Right.
Like we need,
Right.
we're just finding it, right? And maybe sometimes it's
See,
go on.
poets know this, right?
Yep.
Poets know it. I mean, like this is why the poet calls upon the muse, right?
Yep.
You know, the poet says, take what is low in me and elevate, take what is blind in me and illuminate. This is Milton, right?
Yep.
And like they know that when they're poeting, right? Like when they're in that mode and they're in their flow state and they're doing their thing, like they know that it's kind of not just them, right? And so I just got finished teaching Macbeth, and those of you who are on my Twitter feed, I'm sure will laugh at this, but there's a reason, like the dark work that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are going to do by killing the king and taking it for themselves. Like they know that it's a sort of it's a work of anti-creation, right?
Yes.
So instead of calling upon the muses to illumine them and to elevate them, they call upon the dark spirits. And
Yeah.
she explicitly says, you dark spirits that tend to more unsex me now and fill me to the toe top full of direst cruelty, et cetera, right? She knows that in order to engage in this super work, right? Because it is a super work, right?
Yeah.
That it's bigger than you, it's more than you, it's not just you, that the spirits are somehow necessary. And I just think there's a real brutal honesty to that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about that. Imagine, killing the king so that you can become the king. Right? We could all imagine that, right? Because as people have quipped, right? If anybody could actually read your thoughts, all of us would be arrested in seconds, right? So we can all imagine these things, right? What would it take? What would it take for me to cross over and to do the thing?
Yeah.
Remember as a kid, like you're on top, you see the diving board and you're like, oh, I want to go up and do that. And you kind of climb up the diving board. You're like, man, this is a little higher than what you go over to the edge of that and you see down, you're like, holy crap. Like what makes you jump? Right.
Yeah.
Like a spirit makes you jump. Right. And so the spirits are required for us to act. Like we know this. Like this is what's so funny to me. So yet we have we only want to talk like you go on Instagram and you look at workout Instagram or diet Instagram or self-improvement Instagram or whatever, right? We only want to talk about like these great things that are positive, but like there's a whole dark side that we just completely pretend doesn't exist. And so the reason why I'm talking about, so the poets know that they have to call upon the spirits. I think that we kid ourselves if we don't think that the bad things that we do, right, we would just call this sin, right? Those things in which I'm not hitting the mark, that is because another spirit is animating me and has possessing me, if you want to use that kind of language, to get me to act out not a life work, but a death work. Like, I just don't know why we just don't admit it.
No, because it's uncomfortable and it's embarrassing to admit, because part of the reason why it's embarrassing is you're stepping over a line at that point, right?
Yes. Yeah. You have just made yourself a weirdo.
Yeah, you're wearing a tin hat. Like, and again, that you're wearing a tin hat, and you also want to be part of the tribe as the people who are having this in the tribe of the people that are having this conversation, right? So like so again, we talk the person to, the most popular person in the conversation of the meaning crisis right now is John Vervaeke, right? And I don't know, I've never talked to him. I don't know what he thinks about evil spirits or anything like that necessarily. But and people who are with it, again, like, because the meaning crisis, like I said, is approached somewhat on continental philosophical terms, cog-sci terms, religious terms, but very safe, right? Like they're not talking about demonic possession. They're not talking about evil entities. And you don't want to be the person to cross that line, because it also makes everything now a lot more sticky. Because when you open up the door and say that evil spirits might literally exist,
right?
Well, then
literally, there's that word. Paul's going to flag the literally word, but really exist. Really
exist.
Right.
Well, you almost you got to reframe and restart the conversation a little bit, right? So it's not you really do. You have to, it's that, to use the sports reference, you have to go back to the drawing board a little bit,
right?
And I think that's just so damn scary. And people don't want to. I mean, people don't want to. The same people, I think, who have difficulty believing in evil entities have a difficulty in believing in entities such as angels, right?
Okay, right. So to take your flat analogy, right? So we tend to think of the flatness being like ground level, right? But take it right here, right? If you think that this is the reality, not only do you not open yourself up to the upper register, but the lower register is closed off to you as well, right? And that's why I always insist on this underworld
Yes.
idea. Like it's resonant, not just because it shows up in old books, but because it's real. Right. And we can imagine the basement in a variety of different ways, as a building, as I just did, or it's in a cave or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
But we know that in our position in being, like, that there's some lower register that is as consequential in its neglect as it is consequential to neglect the upper one. Right. That being human seems to be about harmonizing these two things. So look, there's no surprise that, it's the cross, and the
Yep.
cross stretches outward and it stretches upward, but it also, it's planted inward. And this is why, Christian iconography gathers up this all the time, right? That the dead are just as important as the living.
Yeah. And yeah, one thing that I was just thinking of, it's, you just see how all this is just played out in even the most mundane expressions of our existence. It's like, why is it then, this is not a coincidence, why is it that in every scary movie does the final battle with the evil spirit or the murderer take place in the basement or the
Exactly.
shed or the tornado shelter?
Right.
It's because they exist. Like,
Right.
this is how, this is real. Like, this is how we perceive it. There's a reason why we're attached to these allegories, to these metaphors,
Patterns.
to these patterns. Yeah, exactly. And again, and when we don't scale that up, though, even like when we don't try to stretch this out, yeah, we start to believe that maybe this is all coincidence, or there's really actually like no depth here.
Right. Because as soon as we recognize that it's not coincidence, then we recognize that there's responsibility.
Yes.
Right. And so we know we need responsibility, but we also fly from it. Right. It's one of those curious things about being a human being. Right. So I think it's just not wanting to admit that we're responsible. And if you talk, we talked or mentioned earlier about the sort of the crisis in masculinity, right? And I don't know what masculinity means outside of responsibility and suffering.
No, I know. And that's one thing I'm very passionate about. That's why I've said before that, it does not matter. There's something about the machismo male that is true, right? So there is something about like
yeah.
There's something to that. But I don't care if I don't care about the man's sensibilities. I don't care if they're into sports. I don't care if they're into lit. I don't care if they're into, I don't care if they're into a combination of the things.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suffering, taking up your cross? Are you are how do I like to put it? Are you being hey, because I want to get this right, because
take time.
I really just feel like all that true masculinity is, are you providing and are you being the protector for a family, right? Do you have dominion over your family? And dominion isn't supposed to mean like this like tyrannical power. I mean, no, are you trying to will the good of the members of your family for an unselfish reason, right? And if yes, if you can sit there and say, I'm the protector, I'm the one who has dominion over, I am the facilitator. My wife once told me that when I was coming home from my classes, and I would work, I would go to school, and then I would come home. And I would come home grumpy. And I wasn't angry at my wife. I was not angry at my son, but I was just angry. I was grumpy. I was pissed off that I'm getting home at 8 o'clock or whatever. And it would bother her. And I could see she was bothered by this. And then because of that, I was annoyed that I felt as if I couldn't just express negative emotions when I got it.
Right.
It's like, I was like, why can't I just be angry? And she said, Joe, you can just be angry, but you don't realize how much, and this is the first time that she said this, and it stuck with me. She said, everything in this household flows through you.
Yeah.
As the man of the house,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
your energy, the atmosphere that you bring when you come home, it all flows through you. Joe, if you are having a bad day and we're able to visibly see that, well, then that affects Dante, my son, that
Right. Right.
affects me, and that just like affects our family dynamics. And I started thinking about my father. My father didn't like his job, and he
Right.
would come home pissed off all the time.
Yeah.
And there was that talk about possession that
Totally.
possessed that whole household.
Yeah.
It made everyone on edge. And so
Yeah.
what I'm just trying to get at is real masculinity is realizing that your tribe, your family, the atmosphere and the ethos, it flows through you, and you have a responsibility, therefore, to protect your family and to bring them to the good, right? And if you're able to do that, I don't care if you are if you can bench press 345 or if you are
Right.
115 pounds.
Right.
You are a man. And the man
Yeah.
that's 115 pounds soaking wet is more manly than the machismo male if he is protecting, providing, and being the energy source of his
Mm.
family.
Man, I really needed to hear that this morning. Because I think you're right. You know, the dominant image of, a dominant image of Christianity for so long, certainly throughout the Middle Ages, leading up to the Middle Ages and into the Middle Ages and even beyond, is the knight.
Yes.
And the knight, has a power, a sort of super agency, but he's not just a warrior. He is a gentleman at the same
Correct.
time, and he is required to be, the most fierce and strong force on the battlefield. But even the way that he conducts his business on the battlefield matters, right? There's no such thing as a cheap shot, for instance, right? That
Yes.
that it's all face to face. It's another, it's always like how you play the game matters, as we might say as a coach,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
I want to
Yes.
win, of course. I'm a coach, right? I'm a human being. I want to win, but like how we win matters.
Yep.
But so as fierce and as competitive as one must be on the field of battle, you must also then be the most sophisticated and civil and courtly gentleman inside. And we struggle with this. I struggle with this, and you talk about coming home, and you had a bad day at work. It happens, right? But recognizing that my bad day at work is not my kid's fault, certainly not my wife's fault.
Correct.
Good Lord. Right. And yet it's really hard not to have the kind of the stickiness of the battle follow you into your domos, right? And that's a real struggle that I have personally, that I know that I need to work on, because I know when my kids are scared of me.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yes.
Right. But then part of me is also like, yeah, well, somebody else needs to understand, that it's not all, sunshine and rainbows out there, right? And you're just like, whoa, 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 pump the brakes, Kale.
Yeah.
What you're giving them is not good, right? So no, I agree with that. I think that so anyway, the night, it has to be reasserted, and I don't know what it's going to look like in our current idiom, but those embodied virtues have to somehow be resurrected. They have to be, and I don't see a path forward, because you need to be fierce to fight bad. You need to be fierce to fight the evil. Like
if these evil spirits are real, you have to have an armor, and an armor is the framework, right?
That's right, exactly.
The armor is the framework. The armor is someone's Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, their Protestantism, whatever. And again, it's all about what armor you're bringing in. Are you just going to show up in chainmail? Are you just going to have the Okay, you can't show up in chainmail.
There's an incredible scene of this actually in the Iliad, and Hector, the great
Yes.
Trojan hero, is essentially kind of, single-handedly keeping the Achaean forces at bay. And he comes in to see his wife, and he comes in, and his wife is, sorry about that, his wife is holding their infant child. And he comes in, and he's in his armor, and he's in his with his fierce headgear.
Yeah.
And he comes in, and his son starts screaming. He's scared of his father. And it's just such a beautiful, right? I mean, it works in terms of the story and all these things that have to be worked out. But the idea that I'm going to walk into my home in my fierce array is it's imprudent, but it's also it's painful. It's violent, right?
Yes.
There's a sort of a violence to that which I'm supposed to be preserving, right? And that which I need to adopt in order to face those forces that would eat my children and destroy my family, like have to be faced in a fierce way, right? But I also can't bring that ferocity into the home, because then what's the point?
Well, yeah, and there is a point to, and this is again what's so just like sad, really. I don't know, I can't put it any other way. It's sad, and it perpetuates why men particularly are in the situation that they're in now, is because there is a point where you can invite, and I'm just for ease, let's just say the son. There is, because again, we're talking about men here. There is a point where you should initiate your son
absolutely
into the evil of the world, right? So the son needs to open up he needs to open up the door, and he needs to leave the house at some point, right? And so maybe it's not a good idea to show up in your armor at when your son is, I don't know, I guess I don't know the age, but let's just say whatever. So
well, we don't, I mean, look, Joe, we don't know the age, right? This is part of the problem.
That is actually part. No, that is part of the problem. And so what I'm trying to get at is that there's no initiation ritual to show that there's no initiation ritual, both either physically or metaphorically, for a young man to realize that masculinity needs to be conducted in a certain way, right? And so fathers either they come home in their armor, right? And so they just think, the son thinks, well, then life is just this evil, dark, scary place. And if I'm to look up to my father, well, then that means that I need to express myself and my being in an evil, dark, scary way because my father's doing that. Or it's my father has never actually shown me all of the beautiful and all of the dangerous aspects of reality, right? So my father's never actually opened up the door for me and said, look, this is all ours. And you have a responsibility and to put on your armor and to defend your future family and your future being. And it's so sad that we have no initiation rituals today. And I've mentioned this before. It's so sad that the initiation ritual that young men have today is watching South Park at 11 p.m. They fall asleep, and then they wake up, and Comedy Central is running a Girls Gone Wild infomercial, and that piques their interest. And so, and then essentially what I'm saying is that leads to lots of pornographic usage, and that's their initiation. I became a man now, right? I physically know what's going on, and I'm physically actualizing something, and so that's very dangerous. And then that completely deteriorates, right? Like if they think that's what manhood is, or if they think that's the initiation process into adult malehood, well, that's a lot of my generation, right? And probably your generation too. And this is why I think this is not, I don't want to just say this is the only reason, but this is one reason why it is difficult to imagine ourselves as the knight, as the Trojan warrior. It's difficult to imagine ourselves as a character in a play. It's just difficult. I mean, because we number one, no one's giving us that knowledge. No one's explaining it the way that me and you have talked about it thus far. And yeah, our fathers are either coming home with their armor on or never even showing us that there's armor meant, or that I've made armor for you, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's particularly sad.
I mean, look, maybe we ended here, but I just sort of finish up here that look at what little boys want to dress up as at Halloween, right? They want to be a firefighter, they want to be a policeman, they want to be a soldier or a knight or something like that. They want they and all of those things, of course, are visible physical gigs.
Yeah,
I think that it's sort of intuitively clear as to sort of what it is they do, and whatever. I mean, there's other stuff, but I mean, just think about that as a sort of a cluster of realities, and why do little boys want to do that stuff, right? And it seems that on some level they can intuit that there is a sort of a good and responsibility to that.
yes,
and so then how does that degenerate into, now I don't want to fight off the bad stuff, a fire or a bad guy or what have you, or the opposing forces, but instead I want to become a cad. Like, to me, what is a shocking inversion that happens at some point, and it's probably fueled by pop culture and music and whatnot, but not, you don't want to be the knight, but you want to be the person that fools the knight. And that is you can't live on that kind of parasitical script. It just doesn't work. And so I look at the boys that I teach, and I think most parents would be really shocked, for instance, at what they laud by way of the music they listen to, for instance.
Sure. Yes.
It's really, it's bad, as it's bad, it's legit bad. And I don't want to be like the sort of the cranky old white guy, but I'm the cranky old white guy, and so I'll just wear it. It's like, the music's bad, people. It's bad. It's not good. It's not heroic. It's anti-heroic. It's a death work. And they wear these things around a little, they wear these things, around all the time, right? And what the script that's pumping through their head is get laid, get high.
Yeah. And when you laud those things, when those become the highest reference point of the vertical, I mean,
right. It's your summum bonum.
Exactly.
It's a substitute summum bonum. It's just particularly crass.
Yes, and that's why it's difficult to talk about a demonic reality, because that is a demonic reality. I mean,
sure.
And it's so hard, because then someone's going to be reactionary. What are you saying?
What are you saying? Drake is a demon? Like, no, that's actually not what I'm saying.
Not what I'm saying. But I'm
certainly
saying,
a demon is working through it.
Yes, but exactly. Like, what I'm saying is that every time that I'm mean spirited to my wife, when every time that I'm not living up to virtue. Yeah, I mean, it's not that dramatic. I'm not speaking Latin and flying across the room. No, there. You have to be more nuanced than what you think about possession is. Yeah. And sometimes, there could be demonic entities that possess your spirit, and no, they're not sticking with you forever. But again, like as you said, we need to bridge this meaning crisis with this reality of evil, and that's very hard to do. And it's funny that this part of the conversation is like a footnote from, it's a good footnote, but it's a footnote from me letting you know that, and letting my viewers know that, I'm going to have Father Vincent Lampard on, and I'm going to try my hardest to try to, in that conversation, reconcile, bridge these things that need to be bridged. And Kale, I know maybe me and you will have more conversations about preparing myself for that.
I hope so. This is great. Yes.
Is there, I mean, how long do you have? You got to get going?
I probably should wrap. Santa doesn't come apparently on his own volition these days, so I do have some Santa work to accomplish.
No, please do. I just want to, well, actually, maybe this is just a good place to end, because this then allows us to have future conversations and not discuss.
I definitely hope so. This has been awesome. Like seriously, this has been fantastic.
So with that being said, is there anything, well, any future or any
Yeah.
near recent projects that you're working on that we can expect?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be continuing to work on my Substack. I'm writing. It's free,
Yep.
so it's me working out a lot of the ideas that you and I were able to
What's
talk
your
about
Substack
today.
again? Just to let
It's
everyone know.
www.kalezelden.substack.com.
Boom. I'll
So
link it too.
yeah, it's a Zelden. And yeah, doing that. I'm actually looking, I want to do some more deep work, sharing sort of old books, right?
Yeah.
For a general audience, because I do believe that so much of our great inheritance, and I'm a mutt, so I inherit all traditions, has been neglected, and so I'm looking forward to finding ways to sort of tell these stories to audiences who can't show up to my class
Yeah.
every day here at school. So I'll be working on that. That's really something I'm hoping to get kickstarted very soon. Great conversations with old books is really what I'm hoping to do. So
I love that. Yeah,
yeah.
and look out for that. Well, hey, I mean, sincerely from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate you coming on. I remember in the beginning, before we got on, I was talking to you about the outline. I feel like we touched a lot about the outline, or we touched a lot of what was in the outline. We didn't touch what was on the
Yeah.
outline, but again, that allows us to have even deeper and more fascinating and complex conversations to come. So, Kale, I really appreciate you hopping on,
Indeed.
and thanks for your time.
Indeed. God bless. Appreciate it. Take care,
Yeah,
man.
Merry Christmas.
Same.